Welcome everybody to another chat with me on my Facebook Live. And I am truly honored to have an awesome guest today, Dr. Kirstin Schaffner. And we're going to be talking about prevention and all the underlying root causes that we can look at when it comes to preventing and also healing from chronic illnesses, of which cancer plays a big part in it as well. So Dr. Kirstin, we are so honored to have you here. And you have an awesome bio, so I'm going to read from it a little bit to introduce you to my community here. You need to know where you have been, because you've been all over the show. So Dr. Schaffner is a board-certified naturopathic physician who graduated from Bastia University in Seattle, Washington. So you are passionate about practicing medicine and creating healing spaces. You are the clinic director of the Sophia Health Institute, and that you co-created with your mentor, Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt, and that is also based in Washington on the West Coast. So you actively see patients not only at Sophia Health Institute, but also at the Marin Naturopathic Medicine in California, as well as the Bella Fiore Organic Medical Spa and Clinic in Seattle again. So you must be traveling up and down the West Coast quite a bit.
I am.
So you have built a lot of partnerships and working relationships with practitioners who are committed to treating persistent Lyme disease all over the world. That's one of the very big kind of unifying factors that we find in integrative medicine, is that in different countries we have kind of similar issues, and in our quest to try and find underlying root causes, we all need to collaborate.
Absolutely.
And share our wisdom, isn't it? So you have a unique set of skills and knowledge to serve with her patients, but also with us practitioners, and that's what we're doing here today. So you as an expert in underlying root causes for chronic illness. And I know you've got a couple of really important points that you'd like to mention. So I'd hand the floor over to you, and let's put us into gallery view. There you go. So that's even better.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Kirstin, for having me, and thank you for the introduction. And I just to share a little bit about kind of my vantage point and where I have been over the last 8 years. I started working with my mentor, Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt, about 8 years ago after graduating naturopathic school. And he really attracts patients who have tried everything, seen everybody, and really are stuck. And so I, from a very early point in my career, was taught to think outside the box and to really look at the root causes of why people are sick. And he has taught me to look at not only the role of our immune system and how chronic infections can play a role on our health and can keep people ill, but also the environment. And I think the environment is a huge piece, especially when talking about cancer. I remember in our naturopathic oncology class how there was a statement, it's thought that even 90% of cancers are environmentally caused. And that was a big, that left an impression in my mind. So we look at the environment, how heavy metals, how the increasing, role of electrosmog from other different persistent organic pollutants are affecting us, and we're bioaccumulating them over time, and how that affects our genetic expression. So we look at epigenetics, and it's not only how our, what genes we have, but how our genes interplay with our environment, and also our emotional trauma as well. So we look at, this big landscape of, the body. And one thing I'd also like to mention is he taught me, and everyone in alternative medicine, I think, has a way of looking at the mind, body, spirit. And his framework is called the 5 levels of healing, and looking at not only our physical body, but our energetic, mental, intuitive, and spiritual body. So for patients who are open, we are definitely always happy to have conversations on all of those levels. And it's kind of this two-way street. There are physical symptoms that can create trauma for people who've been ill for very long, but there's also sometimes traumatic events that our body remembers and our cellular memory remembers, and that can create illness down the road. So we try to really give people a lot of tools, and our treatments are really, comprehensive. And, we ask a lot of our patients, but the patients who are drawn to us are at that motivating point because they've tried a lot of things that haven't worked. And so yeah, I'm speaking from that framework and that viewpoint, and I love learning, and I appreciate you sharing how we like to collaborate. We cannot do this in a vacuum, and we're all, have pieces to the puzzle. But I think the more that we talk and collaborate with other practitioners, we're all kind of on the front line of seeing patients, and this is not in a textbook really yet. And so I think it's really important, as the paradigm is shifting, that we all come together to share knowledge.
I think that's such an important point that you just made, is this whole collaboration. We keep on learning from each other. I think that's such an important point as practitioners too. And, when it comes to addressing what are the underlying root causes, and the weight or the weighting of these underlying root causes, that's different for everybody. But I think the most important part to understand and to get from this conversation too is that we have to look at all the other factors that are the underlying root causes too, and that we do need to step outside the box of just only a conventional approach, and do look at the other elements too that can express a little bit differently for each of us, but that are there. For some of us, the environmental exposure might have been stronger. For others, there was a huge traumatic incident. Although I want to add to that, because also from my own personal experience, it doesn't necessarily have to be a big traumatic experience. It can be other underlying emotional root causes too that we need to address. So we must never, ever underestimate looking in that area as well. I call it my 5-step process to transform your relationship with cancer. That's actually the subtitle of my book, because I think those 5 areas, and it includes emotional self-care right there, and energetic work there. I think it's important. We can't ever ignore that. But as you said too, it's the environmental exposure that is kind of increasing. It's kind of this ever increasing burden that we have to deal with. And you also mentioned the bioaccumulation of toxins. And that's something I've talked about again and again, because that's where we differentiate ourselves too as individuals. Some of us can deal with a higher toxic burden than others, and we need to understand the interplay and how that affects on our genetic expression as well. That could potentially give us the clues as to where do we need to really zone in and focus when it comes to creating our healing path. And that's exactly what you do when you work with patients.
Absolutely. And I think as medicine is getting more personalized, and how we're learning more and more on the genetic piece, patients are doing more tests like 23andMe, and then we're also looking at a test called Utrines now at McGill University in Canada. And what you're sharing is that some people handle the environment differently, and I think none of us are immune of what's happening to the planet and how our bodies are interacting with it, but we all interact with that differently, and could have with how we, for instance, the 23andMe or the Utrines test looks at cytochrome P450 enzyme. So how our liver metabolizes certain toxins, or our glutathione S-transferase expression, and how we can get rid of the things that we're exposed to. And then we always do a really thorough history when we're meeting with people and looking at environmental exposures, occupational exposures, where people lived, where people were born, the health of the mom. We look at the dental picture a lot, because that's a big source of toxicity in the body as well. And so, yeah, absolutely. I'm in complete agreement of that. We have to look at how our patients, how they respond to the environment. And we're all, unfortunately, our food, our air, our water, the basic things that we need to all live and function. There's just increasing toxicity in all of these facets of our environment at this point.
So in order, for the sake of this conversation here, to help people, first of all, we're understanding what we're talking about, but also, what would you say is a first step that someone can take who might be listening to this and realizes, I haven't addressed that in my life yet? So what would be the first step to take? I have no idea if whatever I was exposed to, if that has accumulated in my body. How do I know that? What would they do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great question, and it's going to be individual for everyone. With the question in mind, I also want to just reiterate, I do think it's important that we lead a life of detoxification. So there's this trend in doing cleanses and detox diets and all of that, which there's a place for, of course. But I think really I tell my patients a lot of times it's a marathon, not a sprint. And when we have a lifetime exposure of these things, we're not going to get rid of these things overnight. And we're also going to be continually exposed. So when we think about first steps, I would just like to preface, just understanding, just some basic themes in life. Do you eat organic food? Do you have a water filter? Have you ever had dental amalgams? Vaccines are also an exposure to aluminum, depending on what vaccines you've had. What kind of personal care products do you use? These are kind of like the laundry list of things you can go through your checklist with. And depending on that, there's room for improvement, right? For any detoxification process always starts with trying to limit or avoid exposure. There's some things that are going to always be out of our control, but what can we do in our home environment to clean up our life, right? And so that starts with food, water, also the air in the home, the personal care products that you use on your skin, and then the cleaning products. So I think that's a first kind of it's a big first step, but I think just taking a survey of your life in that way. And then I think now there's so much education nowadays, and there's so many companies who responded to the need for people who are really desiring cleaner products in their life. And so I think we have a lot more choices in the US these days than we have been. And, I see patients who are what we call multiple chemical sensitive. So their bodies can't even tolerate what's in a normal product. And I think I just illustrate that to share that these products have a lot of neurotoxins and carcinogens and things that very sensitive people. I like to say that my MCS patients are kind of the canary in the coal mine. So they're responding in a very, immediate reactionary way to things that we all should not have in our life.
And I know you also are very adamant about the whole debate that we have with preventing skin cancer, of course, because we want to practice prevention, but we want to practice mindful prevention. And when it comes to skin cancer, one of the widely announced prevention practices is slather on sunscreen. All the time. Don't go out without sunscreen. I've just come back from the dermatologist. He says the same thing, slap on sunscreen all the time. Don't even go out without it. And yet here we are. We also know and understand how important the sun is. And so what are your views on that? And how do you guide your patients through this kind of dilemma?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a big topic. And again, I think there's a lot more information nowadays than there ever has been. And, one of the things to share, I have a organic med spa, so organic skincare is a big passion of mine, and the sunscreen issue comes up a lot in this community. And, just to take a step back and share with people about sunscreen. So the sun, gives us life. We need the sun, and we can talk about that in a lot of ways, but it does, the UV radiation comes in the form of UVA or UVB rays, and UVB rays are, think of burning rays, UVB burning. And that's what our SPF, or that sun protection factor in sunscreen, is basically acknowledging how does the sunscreen protect people from those UVB rays. UVA rays are, think of aging, A for aging, and they tend to be, they penetrate deeper into the skin. They're going to create more damage on a DNA level and can be more, aging, so affect, collagen and wrinkling, and also, trigger skin cancer as well. And so one of the things you think about when you want to get a sunscreen, you want to protect against those UVA rays. And there's this kind of thought between chemical and physical sun blockers in sunscreens. The chemical sunscreens tend to be a little bit more toxic. One of the most studied ingredients in a chemical sunscreen is oxybenzone. There's been a lot of press around that, with Hawaii banning oxybenzone sunscreens because of the DNA damage that the oxybenzone is doing to the coral reefs. And so just to think about that alone, that the sunscreen humans are putting on their skin, going in sunbathing, going into the ocean, that has such a dramatic effect that the coral are bioaccumulating that toxin and are dying. So I think just thinking of that is a good illustration. So oxybenzone, I definitely recommend avoiding. It's also known to be an endocrine disruptor, which we want to avoid, especially if we have cancer in our family history. And then when we think about what we want to choose, I think the best type of sunscreen on the market right now is a zinc oxide. Zinc is going to be a physical blocker, and it does block UVB and UVA rays. There's also this thought of non-nano zinc oxide, which they can nanonize the molecules of the zinc, because zinc tends to be white and sit on the skin. And if it's nanonized, it can go into the skin a little bit better, but that can penetrate. There's debate about the penetration. That's not completely agreed upon in science, but we don't want the zinc oxide to go into the bloodstream. We want it to stay in the dermis. And I think my concern more is the spray, of the nanonized, sunscreens that are zinc oxide, because the inhalation is definitely something that we want to avoid. So I'm at this point, while science is agreeing on what's penetrable and not, the non-nano zinc oxide sunscreen, I think, is going to be the best option when choosing sunscreen. And, I'm happy to kind of share the conversation. Once we have how to protect ourselves, what benefits does the sun actually offer us as well when we're thinking about cancer prevention?
Yeah. What about, sometimes people ask me this too. We get the foundations, makeup and so on that have SPF in them, sun protection in them. And you get powders, even the foundation powders, everyone's putting SPF in everywhere. What do you say to especially the powders? Because that can be airborne too, that can be inhaled.
I think that's a great point. I mean, I think that I like to keep the products separate and usually just pick a sunscreen that you feel, confident in, and then separating that out from your cosmetic, products, because I do think, that way you can have more control over the ingredients. And I hadn't really, thought about having but the powders, absolutely. I mean, that can, any makeup really can get into, our nose, our eyes, our, mouth. So we have to be really mindful of ingredients that we're putting on our skin, because we're ingesting them. And that's why, lead can be in lipstick, or used to be, that's why we really want to make sure that we're using healthy personal care products and cosmetics. And I think nowadays there's so many more options that you don't have to feel like you're missing out on. If you love makeup, if you want to color your hair, if you, all those things that I'm totally okay, fine with it. There's just healthier choices that work now, which is awesome.
Yes, exactly. So, I think we do live in a day and age where, the industry has understood that there's a demand, and we just need to look in certain spaces. But I'm finding the selection on offer is steadily increasing. So there's not even a need that you feel that you're missing out. But you touched on the point too, and I wanted to pick up on that because, when it comes to toxicity in our skincare products, that's something, we can control because we're also exposing ourselves to that on a daily basis. But there's another form of toxicity that is a little bit more tricky, and that is in our teeth. It's the amalgam or the silver fillings in our teeth. And I know you have some very, very important points to make on that too. So why don't you go
absolutely. Dr. Klinghardt is German, and in the field of German biological medicine, they look at the mouth very closely. Our teeth develop from the same embryological tissue that our nervous system develops as well. And if you have a viewpoint of, or framework rather, for acupuncture, each tooth sits on an acupuncture meridian, so it can affect that meridian system. So the teeth are really intimately related to the rest of our body. And when you think of just the American Heart Association, also, we know that if you have periodontitis or anything going on, that you have an increase in bacteria in the mouth, that can affect your heart. So conventional medicine recognizes that oral health is very important as well. And we take it a step further, looking at materials. So it's becoming more and more, more people are aware and it's becoming less common, but it's still happening, where people have amalgam fillings. And amalgams are an amalgamation of metals, so silver, tin, but also mercury. And mercury is a known neurotoxin. The ADA would say, oh, mercury, it's inert, it's not, active, nobody's, being exposed, but they have studied that, mercury vapor does get released over time, and that mercury can actually get into our cranial nerves, it can get into our brain, it can get into our lymphatic system, it can get into our breast. The mouth is very, if you have mercury in your mouth, I absolutely consider that an exposure to mercury. And then our first step with any patient, most of our patients have gotten their amalgams out before they come to see us, but we walk people through that, one of the first steps. And that's something not to do on your own. You have to really do that with a very skilled dentist who understands how to not only re-expose you to the mercury, but also to protect themselves, because they're, working with a highly toxic ingredient. And so that's really important. And then also to work with like a naturopathic or a functional medicine doctor alongside that, so they can support your body with all the things that we do to do that. So I just want to make sure that you just don't go to anyone to get your amalgams out. And just to also, I think another less common ideas around root canals. Root canals are dead teeth, and root canals, without sounding too controversial, but there is truth in this. There is a connection to breast cancer and root canals. And so root canals can harbor, different bacteria over time. Some root canals used to be filled with mercury, so that can be a mercury exposure. And then there's other toxins like thioethers or mercaptans that get secreted by the root canal tooth, and that can be, put a big strain on the body. And I just, from our vantage point, the teeth drain into the lymphatic system, and the lymph system drains also into the breast, and breast are lymphatic tissue. So when we think about cancer prevention and breast cancer, the mouth has a lot to do with that.
It's such an important point to do. And I think if you happen to be someone who's already diagnosed, or you are going through cancer treatments right now, listen to what Dr. Kirstin Schaffner here has to say, and take it to heart, but be mindful that this is a process, and detoxification at that level, on a cellular level, especially from heavy metals, is a process, and it needs to be done under the supervision of a professional healthcare provider, because we need to access those metals, and we need to safely escort them out of the body. And we're using body organs, we're using organ systems for that, and they need to be monitored. Each one of us is different there, so it needs to be done under professional care, but it needs to be done, and it also needs to be done in a very slow and steady way. So I think there is just another word of caution that this can't be done overnight. We can't have immediate results, and we have to absolutely listen to the body and see how it wants to go through this process. And again, if I can say this, but speaking from personal experience too, I used to have silver fillings, had them removed years ago. Then regularly do heavy metal testing and see where am I at, and how am I going to get rid of them. And I have to monitor how it works, because you need to support your liver, you need to support your kidneys, you need to support your lungs, you need to support your digestive system. All the organs of detoxification that are involved need to be monitored, and just to make sure it really is able to be escorted out of the body, because toxins like this, they can basically be stopped or halted, if I can explain it like that. And if, for example, phase 2 detoxification of our liver doesn't work properly, which right now I have that situation again. That's why I monitor myself regularly. But all of a sudden, and I could feel it, I wasn't doing very well. Whereas phase 2 is blocked right now. So we're focusing on phase 2 again. So detoxification halts at this point in time, and we're just focusing on, all of a sudden, my glutathione levels are depleted again. So we need to have more of a focus on that right now. But it's a journey, it's a process, but we have to do it in order to support the body from within.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's such an important point, and heavy metals can accumulate in different tissues. And so testing can be misleading at times. You know, there are different types of tests. There's blood levels, which a conventional doctor would do, which very uncommonly your heavy metals will show up in the blood unless you're having a very acute exposure. So we tend not to look at blood levels, but there's hair levels. There's also, you can look in the stool, and then you can do a urine provocation test where we give you an agent which grabs heavy metals from your tissues, and then you collect your urine, and then we look at the levels there. And that can be, depending on where you are, if you are minerally depleted, you might not be releasing those metals. If, you know, the body is excreting them, you know, we will see a good, you know, excretory level of these metals. But if the body's in a retention pattern, they might look low when they're actually high and deep in the body. And so I just want to share that, because I often have patients, oh, we've looked at heavy metals, I don't have heavy metals, my tests look good. And I'm like, you know, the heavy metals in your brain are not going to show up overnight in the urine provocation test. So I just want to share that, because I'm, of course, going to be a little bit jaded from my vantage point, but I believe everybody has a heavy metal exposure, and that part of preventing neurological disease and cancer is to really reduce, you know, your heavy metal load. And you can do that aggressively with chelation, which we do at times in a supportive environment, but also these lifestyle techniques are going to also, from sweating, you know, all the things that, you know, we also actually like the ionic foot bath, that seems to work. Binders, cilantro, hydration, good mineral status. You know, there's a lot of ways to just continually trying to get that level out. But you made a really good point, and you know, you want to make sure all the phases of your liver are working, your kidneys are really supported, that you're having regular bowel movements. You don't want to do this in a toxic, congested system, because you'll just feel worse. So
exactly. And it's a process, and that's where, you know, the collaboration comes into being again. So we have access to functional doctors like yourself, who actually are able to do the testing. And then from a lifestyle point of view, you know, people like myself, we can support people going through that process and looking at all the other factors in which you can support through your nutritional habits and your lifestyle habits, support the detoxification process as you move through this path. So, so important to do. So I'm just thank you for sharing this valuable information, because it's a key informational component that is not always addressed, and it certainly is missing when you only focus on conventional care, standard of care. I think there's so much room in terms of looking at us holistically and understanding what are the root causes that are contributing to my health situation today, and what are the issues that I need to look at in terms of healing and moving forward and strengthening my body from within. So
absolutely.
In closing comments, what would you like to share with my community, and also where, if they want to have access to your wisdom from a more in-depth point of view, how can they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, you know, for inviting me. And I think, you know, we've touched on a lot of great points. I think in closing, just one last point, since we mentioned sun exposure, I just want also, I think there's a fear of the sun. And if we have mindful, shorter daily exposures where we're not exposing ourselves to getting burned, it actually is really important. Vitamin D3 is a really important actually hormone. It's more than a vitamin, that it's a steroid hormone that is really helpful for preventing autoimmunity, cancer, neurological disease. And we actually need the sunlight to hit our skin to convert a lot of that vitamin D that's going to be the most active in our body. So I think that's important. And then just another thought, from our vantage point, when we're not in nature, not exposed to the sun, and we're inside all the time with all this, what's called junk lighting at this point, where we're getting all this artificial lighting, from fluorescent lights to compact fluorescence to even LED, we kind of excuse ourselves from the natural circadian rhythm that happens. And it's important to, you know, when the sun rises, to go and get that stimulation in our eyes and get a lot of that blue light, and that over the course of the day that changes. And then we want to have a very dark environment at night. And why I'm bringing this up when we're talking about cancer prevention is that there is actually studies of people who are shift workers at night or have a lot of jet lag. If we are not in tune with that process, we have an increased risk of cancer. And I think that has a lot to do with melatonin. I've talked a lot about melatonin as a not only helping our brains with neurological disease and detoxification, but there's a lot of studies around melatonin as a cancer preventative tool, as well as, a treatment, and it helps to boost our immune system. I could go into the science, but it just is a closing thought to connect with nature, connect with the rhythm of the sun, connect with that clock that we all have and we ignore because technology is fun and we get home at night and we want to just, be in front of our screens and things. But that does have an impact on our pineal gland, on our melatonin production, and that can set us up for cancer. So I just want us to not. That's a huge lifestyle piece that I think that people need to be aware of.
So important. Sleep and listen to your body, and make sure that you use these so-called apps that we can get to, create different lighting on our screens to help our bodies get ready for sleep, because it's that part really that we are missing now, is this allowing our bodies to set up and get ready so we actually can have a good night's sleep, because we usually running on the screen and boom, we fall into bed and then wonder why we have a restless sleep. That's a very, very important point that I always make with my clients as well. But thank you so much for being here. Where can they find you?
My sleep.
Where can they find you?
I have two websites. One, you can find me at drkirstinschaffner.com. And then I primarily see patients at Sophia Health Institute in Woodinville, Washington. We have a great team of practitioners, and Dr. Klinghardt sees patients there. It's at sophiahi.com.
And that's a brick and mortar practice. Do you see virtual patients as well?
We have to establish care in person, and then we do work with people over the phone in between visits. A lot of our work is very hands-on, and so we love to see patients in person, and then we can work over the phone.
After that, such an important point. We need to establish the healing team first, and afterwards. But you have lots of information out there too. So educational information out there too. So I really encourage you to go to the website, Dr. Kirstin Schaffner. That's with a double F. So another German name, Schaffner. .com, SCHAFFNER. So drkirstinschaffner.com. And what just remains to be said is thank you very much for sharing your wisdom and your expertise with my community. I'm very honored to have you.
Thank you, Kirstin. I appreciate your time today.
So, bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.